Thank you, Administrator Nelson, for joining us here today. It's great to be with you and this committee on this hearing focused on space, NASA, and exploring the final frontier. The story of Missouri is intimately tied to the exploration of the stars. Famous astronomer Edwin Hubble was born in Marshfield, Missouri, and the telescope dedicated to his name has forever changed our understanding of the universe. As ranking member of the Space and Science Subcommittee, I look forward to working with you to progress the priorities of this committee. Of those, the one in front of us here today is NASA's reauthorization, and I'm eager to work in a bipartisan fashion with you and the full committee, chair and ranking member, to hopefully get that across the finish line. Here in the United States, we're privileged to have a robust commercial supplier base at the foremost space flight companies in the world. Over 20 Missouri-based companies from Joplin to Hazelwood are actively supporting the Artemis mission to return man to the moon. As ranking member of the Space and Science Subcommittee, I want to do everything in my power to leverage the abilities of innovation that the U.S. companies possess to maintain American space dominance. It's imperative that the U.S. and the appropriate agencies develop thoughtful, common-sense standards when it comes to the development and deployment of technologies related to orbital debris management, commercial space stations, and other deep space waypoints, hypersonics, human landing systems, and the numerous other technologies necessary to get us back to the moon and beyond to Mars. I can't emphasize this enough. So much of this developing technology is just that, developing. Sadly, the default approach around this town, in my view, is what more can the government do, not less innovation thriving under the light torch of regulation, not the heavy hand of government. While I still have a lot to learn in this space, no pun intended, I, along with my staff, continue to hear from industry about how knee-jerk and untenable regulations have stymied U.S. leadership. This shouldn't be anyone's goal, especially as foreign adversaries seek to undermine our efforts at every corner. On that note, I want to speak about the near and present danger of China. China's capabilities in space and beyond is alarming. Madam Chair, I'd like to submit the following articles entitled, "A Chinese spacecraft has been checking out U.S. satellites high above Earth, and China building cyber weapons to hijack enemy satellites," says U.S. leak, which highlight the ability of the CCP multi-directional satellites to stop and gather intel on U.S. space equities, and the CCP's development of cyber weapons to seize control of U.S. space equities. While I commend the administrator for the many initiatives he will highlight in his testimony, I strongly disagree with this administration's obsession with misguided woke policies related to climate change and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Administrator Nelson, America cannot afford to take its eye off the ball with the rising threat of the CCP. There is simply too much at stake. President Xi and the CCP are hell-bent on dominating us on every front. We must be laser-like focused on our approach, and I can assure you that China has no interest in out-DEIing us, and they're not intimidated at all by this divisive, radical policy that's found its way in this budget. Madam Chair, thank you again for convening this hearing, and thank you to Administrator Nelson for appearing before us today. I look forward to today's hearing and the proceedings. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Schmitt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's good to see you again. We had a great visit in my office, and I noticed you already pulled out the "I'm just a country lawyer" line earlier, which is one of my favorites. But anyway, it's good to see you again. I did want to ask you, you know, NASA has such a great tradition and reputation as relates to working with private industry for the development of new technologies. And you see this kind of innovation, and it's only continuing to grow. And we're on this, I mean, space has always been referred to as the final frontier, but we're continuing to push that envelope, which is great. Could you give the committee, or the three of us, I suppose, an idea of what you're doing or some specific efforts that you've employed as commissioner or the agency in general to help foster that kind of innovation as opposed to being an impediment? Because this is one of the, obviously the great concerns is government getting too involved, potentially stymieing some of that innovation. And this is, with space, I appreciate your comment earlier about China. I serve on the Armed Services Committee as well. And, China is playing for keeps, and space is, sort of ground zero for that competition that we're in. So just if you could walk through some of the things that you're doing that help foster innovation as opposed to hinder it.
Our seed corn is research and development. We don't want to ever give that up. And that is the mission of NASA. It may be in space, it may be aeronautics, it may be in climate by what I just described. It may be looking for asteroids. It may be trying to understand these phenomenon that you are being briefed on in the Senate Armed Services Committee on UAPs. It's got a new name, unidentified anomalous phenomena. It may be all of this, but it's the research and development that allows this country to move forward. So we see it in so many things. The reason it's going to accelerate and sustain itself is we do it not just as a government agency, but we do it with our commercial partners and now our international partners. And that all brings to the table a new mix of research and development. Whether we're talking about space, let's take the example there of going back to the moon. Now we go and have already demonstrated without a crew on the test flight. The Artemis mission #1 and the spacecraft Orion flying around the moon, we are putting a crew on, but we go with commercial partners because the third mission, we're going into lunar orbit, we're going to start to establish a lunar space station, and we are joining up with a commercial lander. The first winner of the first competition was SpaceX. We have a second competition that is just coming to a close, and the winner of that competition, so will be announced very shortly. And so we will have 2 landers. And therefore, it's a public-private partnership. We also, to go back to the moon this time in a different way, we go with our international partners. That wasn't the case half a century ago. We did it as the US government. This time, even on the first crew, the ones that are coming here to Capitol Hill today, our first international astronaut is Jeremy Hansen, a Canadian F-18 Royal Air Force pilot. And so it's the beginning of these international crews. Now, on the International Space Station, we've been having international crews there ever since the late 1990s when we opened up the International Space Station.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm limited on time, but I do want to make the point in following up with some of the comments from Senator Cruz. And he was talking about climate, and you've indicated that China is a serious threat competitor here. In the budget, it is worth noting that China is mentioned one time in the budget. Les Mis, I hear the ringtone. China is mentioned one time, but climate and DEI-related items are mentioned 153 times in the budget. So we talk about priorities, not that that's the litmus test, but my concern is, and also serving on our Armed Services Committee, we've had, with the leadership of Senator Wicker as the ranking member, had a lot of questions to some political appointees to those positions about, again, this obsession with this political ideology. And NASA has had such a great reputation. I do not want to see NASA dragged into these political fights and the politicization that dominates everything. NASA has no business in that. So it's more of a comment than a question. I would urge you to rethink this administration's obsession with this divisive ideology that's now finding its way in military budgets, NASA budgets, and I just think it's completely wrongheaded. But thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Wicker.